Welcome to our introductory course on Eternalism, the divine philosophy of the eternal worlds. Unit 29, Emergency Podcast for Parents of Latter-day Saint Youth, Part 4. In Unit 29, we continue this emergency podcast series for parents of Latter-day Saint Youth, diving deeper into the rising storm of artificial superintelligence, social media influencers, and unvetted spiritual impressions, forces capable of overwhelming today's youth. This rising storm underscores President Russell M. Nelson's warning that we will not survive spiritually in the coming days without the constant influence of the Holy Ghost. We've now explored the first two of the three outside influences fueling the rising storm, and with that foundation in place, we're ready to confront the third, unvetted spiritual impressions. I've associated this influence with what I call reckless confidence, and I've described it this way: USI is reckless, because in a world already clouded by religious confusion, relying on spiritual impressions as divine guidance without objective validation leads many to mistake feelings for the voice of God and a reckless confidence in following these impressions. Before we explore the threat posed by USI, let's revisit a question from our first podcast. Why would the youth of today turn to unvetted spiritual impressions for rigor, order, and salvation? A broader and perhaps more understandable question might be, why would the youth of today turn to religion for rigor, order, and salvation? To address this issue, let's focus on a specific and uniquely positioned generation, Gen Z. Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2012, are often labeled lazy, entitled, or unwilling to work or pursue higher education. But before we rush to judgment, we need to ask, why should they go to work or pursue higher education given the kind of world they're inheriting? Let me explain. This is the first generation growing up under the weight of massive cultural, technological, and spiritual disruption. They're not just navigating change, they're confronting a perfect storm of forces that challenge the very meaning of identity, purpose, and relevance. So, before we judge this generation, we need to understand what they're really facing. They are not a shallow or aimless generation. They are a generation under siege, a generation that knows all too well they are living in an age of cultural disintegration and artificial dominance. And to truly see that, we need to take a closer look at the dark clouds hanging over them. Gen Z is coming of age amidst unprecedented upheaval. First, the emergence of postmodern deconstructionism has dismantled the very foundations of Western society. Truth, morality, identity, purpose, and meaning are no longer stable guides. Traditional narratives that once anchored generations have fractured, leaving young people without clear values or direction. At the same time, the rapid rise of artificial superintelligence, ASI, presents a profound existential threat. With ASI technology and superiority rendering Gen Z obsolete, the roles they might have filled in work, education, and innovation are being replaced. This leaves an entire generation grappling with a fundamental question: what is our place in a world where machines outperform us in every way? Compounding this crisis is the growing presence of virtual super-influencers, ASI-generated digital figures, which reshape belief and culture. These synthetic voices claim authority over moral and cultural norms, displacing human leaders, mentors, parents, and traditions. For Gen Z, the line between authentic human experience and artificial influence is increasingly blurred. Together, these forces leave Gen Z fragmented, disoriented, and searching for relevance and meaning in a world where the cultural bedrock is in ruins, their future role is uncertain, and the voices guiding society are no longer human, but artificially generated. This generation faces an existential crisis unlike any before, a struggle not only to find their place, but to redefine what it means to be human in an age overrun by cultural disintegration and artificial dominance. Postmodern deconstructionism has been so pervasive and disruptive that nothing remains but cultural rubble and ruins. If we pause to acknowledge the fragmented, disoriented world our youth now inhabit, we'll see that Gen Z is growing up in a world where nothing feels real, true, good, just, or beautiful. Instead, everything feels fake, false, phony, political, and meaningless. This is not simply a phase of growing pains, maladjustment, or immaturity. It's an existential crisis. Gen Z, fragmented, disoriented, and searching for relevance and meaning, is increasingly taking matters into their own hands. More and more are turning to religion, not just any religion, but one they see as offering rigor, order, and salvation from the existential crisis they're caught in, Catholicism. Consider these recent, surprising reports. The first article states, Gen Z flocks to Catholicism in search of truth and order as young people reject leftism. Gen Z is turning toward religion, conservatism, and traditional values because they long for order, said Coleman Bunn, treasurer of Young Americans for Freedom at the University of Florida. He said his generation is looking for traditions with long histories, structure, and answers for many pertinent questions, such as the meaning of life, which is why so many are turning to Catholicism. What's striking is that Gen Z is not turning to the more casual and flexible nature of Protestantism, but to Catholicism instead. This observation is echoed in a second article titled, Why Millennials and Gen Z Are Converting to Catholicism in 2025, which reads, Many of these new believers cite a deep-seated discontent with what they describe as lax or casual Protestant churches. For some, the modern worship experience felt more like a concert or community gathering than a spiritual experience with God. Sidney Johnston, there's something so beautiful and transcendent about the rituals and the ancient history in the Catholic Mass, she said. The church does convey a level of reverence that I didn't find in the more liberal, laissez-faire style of non-denominational churches. No one should be surprised that Gen Z is searching for relevance and meaning among the rubble and ruins left behind by postmodernism's deconstructive onslaught. What is surprising is that they would not only find this relevance and meaning within religion, but among one of the more austere religious faiths, Catholicism. But the larger and even more controversial question is this: why has religion alone survived the postmodern onslaught on Western values, such as universal truth, objective morality, the nuclear family, tradition, and even gender roles? Yes, many Christian denominations cave to the cultural pressures, but for the most part, the religious lights are still on amid the cultural darkness, rubble, and ruin of postmodern deconstructionism. As to why religion alone appears to have survived the onslaught may surprise you. To understand how religion survived postmodernism's onslaught and why Gen Z should be cautious in embracing it so eagerly, I've framed the issue with the following question. The supernatural, too irrational to deconstruct? After all, postmodernism's critique targeted reality, morality, and sanity, not a supernatural realm grounded in faith, revelation, or emotion. Religion, by appealing to what lies beyond verification, largely evaded deconstruction. But here is a more direct and more controversial explanation. Religion survived the postmodern onslaught, not through strength, but through scandal. Its supernatural, faith-based nature placed it beyond reason's reach. Immune to verification and untouched by deconstruction, it endures. Not as a testament to truth, but as a testament to the invincibility of the irrational and supernatural. This is what Gen Z must confront, that what they are turning to for rigor, order, and salvation is no less problematic than what they are fleeing. Let's explore why. To begin with, is Gen Z aware that religion is perhaps the oldest and most powerful super-influencer in human history? From the dawn of recorded civilization, religion has shaped how people live, think, act, and die, as well as uniting societies, dividing nations, and wielding immense moral and cultural authority. Yet how many in Gen Z truly grasp what they're embracing? Too often forgotten is religion's checkered past, a legacy of holy wars, fractured doctrines, and conflicting claims to ultimate truth. At the heart of it all lies the great scandal, which God is the one true God. In the equally scandalous response, mine, meaning not yours. We could explore the problems across every branch of philosophy, but let's focus on two: metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics, the realm of being, raises this critical question. Is Gen Z aware that religion rests on a supernatural framework, a supernatural God, supernatural miracles, and a supernatural faith, each representing a shift from the primacy of existence to the primacy of consciousness? Now let us shift to epistemology, the realm of knowing. Religion's appeals to dogma, mysticism, and emotion are not rational modes of knowing. They reject the primacy of existence in favor of subjective belief. And yet, how many in Gen Z even recognize that what they are embracing is built not on reason or reality, but on the primacy of consciousness itself, a rejection of objective truth in favor of subjective belief? To grasp the magnitude of Gen Z's turn from postmodernism's ruins toward religion's supernatural and faith-based claims, we must revisit Unit 10, where we outline the three dominant philosophical mindsets of our time. First came the pre-modern mindset, rooted in subjective truth and the belief that God is the measure of all things. This gave way to the modern mindset, which rejected God as the standard of truth and instead upheld reality as the measure of all things, championing objectivity, reason, and truth. Then came postmodernism, which dismissed both God and reality, claiming instead that man is the measure of all things, a stance grounded in radical subjectivity. As Latter-day Saints, we find ourselves both building and defending the temple of truth, rejecting the pre-modern mindset for its false creeds and supernaturalism, and opposing the postmodern mindset for its radical skepticism and nihilism. It's important to note that postmodernism targeted the modern worldview, not the pre-modern. The attack fell on reason, objectivity, and the idea that truth can be known, not on religion's supernatural or faith-based foundations. So, in today's cultural rubble, Gen Z faces two dominant paths: the identity politics and grievance culture of postmodernism, or the faith-based promises and supernatural claims of religion. But despite seeming to be opposed, both share a common foundation, a commitment to the primacy of consciousness, the belief that mind or will shapes reality, whether it's man's mind or God's. Let's examine this further. Think of it this way. In rejecting the political left and embracing the religious right, Gen Z is unknowingly exchanging a postmodern for a pre-modern mindset. While they rightly turn from the primacy of consciousness on the political left, where man is the measure of all things, they unknowingly adopt the same error by embracing the primacy of consciousness on the religious right, where God is the measure of all things. This shift replaces the nihilism of man with the absolutism of God, trading one erroneous mindset for another. In doing so, Gen Z once again bypasses the primacy of existence, where reality, not man or God, is the true measure of all things. Gen Z doesn't need to reject religion, but to realign with one rooted in the primacy of existence, where reality, not man or God, is the measure of all things. In short, a course correction toward the restored gospel of Jesus Christ in these latter days. We stated earlier in this podcast that Gen Z is the first generation growing up under the weight of massive cultural, technological, and spiritual disruption. They're not just navigating change, they're confronting a perfect storm of forces that challenge the very meaning of identity, purpose, and relevance. As such, Gen Z faces an existential crisis unlike any before, a struggle not only to find their place, but to redefine what it means to be human in an age of cultural collapse and artificial dominance. With that in mind, let's briefly summarize what we've covered about Gen Z so far. 1. Disillusioned with postmodernism. Gen Z is rejecting the chaos of postmodernism, its relativism, identity politics, and cultural nihilism after seeing its failure to provide meaning, stability, or moral clarity. 2. Drawn to religion for structure. In search of rigor, order, and salvation, many are turning to religion, particularly traditional forms like Catholicism, for its clear moral framework, sacred rituals, and promise of truth. 3. Unaware of the philosophical trade-off. In rejecting the primacy of man's consciousness, postmodernism, they are unknowingly embracing the primacy of God's consciousness, premodernism, swapping one form of subjectivism for another. 4. Misguided return to the supernatural. This embrace of faith-based, supernatural worldviews reintroduces ancient problems, unverifiable claims, dogmatism, and appeals to emotion over reason or evidence. 5. Cut off from reality once again. Instead of moving forward, Gen Z bypasses the primacy of existence, where reality is the measure of all things, and risks repeating the same philosophical errors in a different form. 6. Final thought. Why this matters. Gen Z's turn from postmodernism to religion reflects a deep search for stability, but without discernment, they risk trading confusion for dogma, not truth. To support them, we must guide them toward the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, rooted in reality, reason, and revelation. If this is the world Gen Z is inheriting, shaped by collapse, confusion, and an urgent search for meaning, then why should we assume that our own Latter-day Saint youth are immune to the same cultural pressures? After all, they live in the same world, breathe the same air, scroll the same feeds, and face the same dark clouds of uncertainty hanging over their future. The purpose of exploring Gen Z outside our faith circle wasn't to observe from a distance, but to hold up a mirror because the storm they're navigating is the same storm pressing in on our own. Even with the restored gospel, our youth are not untouched by fragmentation, disorientation, or the longing for relevance and meaning. That's precisely why we must understand what they're up against, and not assume this generation is just like those before it. The cultural disintegration and artificial dominance they face are unlike anything we ever encountered. It may seem sudden to bring up this image of unvetted spiritual impressions and reckless confidence, but it's not out of place. At the heart of this image lies the very religious confusion we've been exploring. Gen Z's rejection of leftist politics in favor of the religious right, often without a clear understanding of religion's long and troubled history. The key point is this: many of the scandals that define that history, from holy wars to conflicting dogmas, ultimately trace back to these unexamined spiritual impressions and the misplaced confidence they can inspire. I now want to highlight the root cause of this religious confusion by connecting the dots between three major scandals, each stemming from unvetted spiritual impressions and the reckless confidence they inspire. The first religious scandal stems from the deeply unsettling question, which God is the one true God? To which each believer responds with a testimony born of spiritual conviction, mine, not yours. The scandal lies in the spiritual standoff between two sincere yet directly contradictory testimonies, each claiming equal authority and finality about which God is the one true God. This initial scandal leads to a second. Which church is the one true church? To which each believer also responds with a testimony born of spiritual conviction, mine, not yours. Once again, the scandal lies in the spiritual standoff between two sincere yet directly contradictory testimonies, each claiming equal authority and finality about which church is the one true church. These two initial scandals then lead to a third. Which spiritual witness is the one true witness? To which each believer responds once more with a testimony born of spiritual conviction, mine, not yours. Here too, the scandal lies in the spiritual standoff between two sincere yet directly contradictory testimonies, each claiming equal authority and finality, about which spiritual witness is the one true witness. Ultimately, these three scandals expose the root of religious confusion in the world: unvetted spiritual impressions and the unchecked, even reckless confidence with which each believer claims their own God, church, and witness as the one true path. The spiritual standoff, rooted in religious confusion, has ignited holy wars at every level of belief, over which God is true, which church is right, and which spiritual witness can be trusted. And the answer, every time, rings out the same: mine, not yours. And with no objective, reality-based method to resolve these conflicts peacefully, is it any wonder that the history of religion has been long divided and often embattled? As we close this episode, let me emphasize, unvetted spiritual impressions are reckless, because in a world already clouded by religious confusion, relying on spiritual impressions as divine guidance, without objective validation, leads many to mistake feelings for the voice of God and a reckless confidence in following these impressions. This concern is especially urgent today. President Nelson urges us to rely even more on the Holy Ghost for spiritual survival in the coming days, but for many, this may mean doubling down on unvetted impressions, which surely isn't what he intended. Still, most Christians believe there is no greater witness than a spiritual impression, and that to question it is to deny the Spirit of God itself. Nonetheless, in our next emergency podcast, we'll go straight to the heart of the issue as to why vetting spiritual impressions isn't just important, it's essential for our spiritual survival as well. We'll lay out exactly how and why this must be done. Which brings us to this closing warning. Perhaps the greatest scandal in all of religion is this: no one dares or is even allowed to vet spiritual impressions without risking their standing before God. As Latter-day Saints, we should know better. After all, the Lord has commanded us to test spiritual impressions, visions, and experiences against clear, objective standards rooted in reality, not just feelings. This ends this Unit 29 presentation. Thank you for watching. Join us in Unit 30 as we continue this emergency podcast series for parents of Latter-day Saint youth. We'll dive deeper into the rising storm, driven by artificial superintelligence, social media influencers, and unvetted spiritual impressions, forces powerful enough to overwhelm today's youth beyond their ability to cope.